Welcome back to the Republic Brothers Podcast. I'm Mike, he's Matt, and this is episode 27. Today is January 14th, 2026. Today's episode covers a lot of ground. We start with an interview you don't want to miss with Adam Swart, the founder and CEO of Crowds on Demand. Then we break down the latest on the Minnesota ICE shooting, including new details about the agent's injuries and the DOJ's decision not to open a civil rights investigation. From there, we head overseas as Iran spirals into chaos, and we wrap with a major Supreme Court fight over protecting women's sports. Let's get started. Before we get into today's episode, we want to bring you an interview with Crowds on Demand founder and CEO Adam Swart. This is a conversation we've been looking forward to sharing because Adam brings a perspective you don't always hear. We covered a lot of ground with him, from how he sees the current movement to some bigger picture issues that don't always get the attention they deserve. So whether you agree with everything he says or not, we think this is one of those discussions that's worth listening to all the way through. Let's roll the interview with Adam Swart. All right, so joining us now is Adam Swart, the founder and CEO of Crowds on Demand, the original paid protest and advocacy firm. For more than a decade, Adam has worked across the political spectrum, organizing demonstrations, advocacy efforts, and media-driven campaigns, giving him a rare inside look at how modern protests are funded, staged, and amplified for maximum political impact. Adam's a strong advocate for free speech and lawful civic engagement, and today he's here with us to break down how elite networks and money are reshaping protest culture and why the public should be paying closer attention. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Hey, you got it. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first question really is where the inspiration came for starting the business and how the whole process works, like from start to finish. How does somebody reach out to you and get it set up?
Inspiration came from working a lot of political campaigns, mostly on the Democratic side, though I'm an independent now. One of the challenges was always getting turnout, like I'm 34 years old when I started in politics, 18 years old, early 2010s, whatever. Like this was a different time. The people running the campaigns at the time, they were college students in the 60s. You could get 5,000 students on the quad just with some flyers. So just a very different era, So when we got to doing all that, I was like, okay, if we can get turnout and number one, guarantee it, and number two, have really good, enthusiastic, high quality people, you could really deliver a lot for for a customer. So we do PR stunts, we do politics, we do kind of corporate disputes, like everything in between.
What are the kind of like PR stunts?
So a PR stunt is like, let's just say you're a company and you're trying to get the word out about something, like put together a really big event to raise awareness, a product launch. Maybe you want to protest your competition at a major conference. Like that's an example of a PR stunt. So it's not necessarily like you're antagonistic towards anyone. It's much more like you're just trying to get the word out.
I gotcha. And how do you find the people to go and protest? Is it simply online?
Well, we have a large network of people across the country, and we're constantly recruiting.
Okay. So I want to get to some of the talking points. So you said you pushed to speak out now because of how the protest landscape has shifted away from moral conviction and towards money, messaging, and manipulation. Yeah. You described a massive surge in paid activism requests last year tied to major political flashpoints, and you've warned that most people don't understand how those systems actually work and how they're engineered for media impact. So after 13 years, why are you deciding now that this is the moment to pull the curtain back and explain what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, I've spoken to the media at various points in my career. So this isn't the first time, but I think of that right now. And then I've taken a kind of a break because, as you know, the media is very biased. It's very, it doesn't do a very good job. They have a predetermined outcome of a lot of their stories. So as a result, a lot of times you don't necessarily want to participate in the media. However, one reason that I am speaking out now is for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a lot of misinformation about our business, about Crowds on Demand. A lot of people falsely link what we do to illegal rioting, property destruction, vandalism, violence. We don't have any part of that. We are a law-abiding firm. We do things the right way. We do things respectfully, right? So number one is it's incumbent upon me as the founder to address misinformation, and the misinformation online is to a degree that it like kind of almost like compels me to respond to. So that's number one. Number two, I think there's a very good faith discussion in most cases, but sometimes bad faith in regards to the ethics of what we do. So it's important for me to kind of be out there as a defender of my company and make sure that people understand that what we're doing is above board. We're just paying people who otherwise agree with the subject to go out there and support. We're respectful, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's the ethical point. And then also just to kind of convey who I am and put a face, because sometimes people sort of see this as a soulless, faceless business. And sometimes by not going out in the news, you allow your people to have that speculation. So me being here and on other podcasts and media outlets as well allows that to us to hopefully rebut that.
I was curious, are there any issues that you wouldn't send protesters to? Are there topics that
Lots
are
of
too
them.
sensitive?
Well,
Okay.
I think so there's a few categories, guys. So one category is simply like we would obviously, as I said a few times, is we wouldn't do anything that's illegal. Second
Right.
category is we wouldn't want to put our people at risk. So let's just say you have something that's going to be very tense, like a Proud Boys versus Antifa BLM, right? So that is going to be like a very tense situation, regardless of how you feel about it. So let's just say someone wanted to hire us to kind of get in the middle of that somehow, even that would be a totally legal form of advocacy. I'd probably reject that because you have two groups that are kind of pretty boisterous there, and I wouldn't necessarily want to get in the middle of that. So
Right.
so that's kind of an example of what one category. Well, another category is I don't really like to take on projects that are that don't have the budget to be successful. So if you want to pass a bill through Congress, right, and your budget is like $20,000, like you're probably not going to really be able to do that, But on the other hand, if it's a local issue and you want to make a case to the city council, you probably could, So part of it is just understanding where the budget meets the expectations. Another category that we wouldn't say yes to is anything that involves like a hate group. And obviously, I understand that what one person's hate group is another person's advocacy organization, but it's my company, so it's for me to determine what I think is hateful. Obviously, that doesn't have to be everyone else's determination, but I don't want to be kind of engaging in that.
Right. Okay. So walk us through how the staging, the synchronized hashtags, and the confrontation, how is it planned so that it goes viral and blows up?
Well, yeah, and not all of our work is engineered to go viral. Virality is based on what the client wants, right?
Right.
So sometimes you want a movement to go viral. Sometimes you just want to resolve an issue, right? So that really depends. So yeah, so that depends, but certain things that go viral is it's a little easier to go viral now than it used to be because you have right-wing media and left-wing media, so you don't have to it's not all just mainstream media. When I started this business, you basically had mainstream/liberal media, and then you had maybe a little bit of conservative media, Fox or whatever, but now you have so many content creators that are constantly looking for content that if you're looking to get something to go viral, you have a easier time doing it on the one hand, but it's a double-edged sword because on the other hand, it depends on viral with who, right? Because part of it is your goal to just have one side see it, or is there a goal for everyone to see it? Because there's a lot of things that might go viral on the left, and then I'll know somebody on the right who will say, oh, I never saw it, or vice versa.
Right. So the other thing I saw is the paid protesters, right? So how does the payment or the support, how does all that work?
Well, we pay people based on the work. I like to say it's enough to offset the opportunity cost of whatever other job you're going to do, like assuming it's like a basic type job. Um, my goal is not to pay people for their opinions, but to pay people for their time and expressing their opinions. So, you know, it's if you're a conservative, I like to say that you're not going to go to a BLM protest for a couple $100 and vice versa, right?
Right.
So, what we pay people is enough to compensate them for childcare, for missing a day of like a job or whatever. But it's not so much that it like incentivizes them to betray their convictions.
Right. Okay.
And how much work goes into the before the protest part? Do you
Oh, a
prepare them
lot.
for their arguments, or
Yeah, we
in case
do.
someone
And
comes and talks to them?
we interview everybody, actually. We interview everybody before every event
Okay.
on phone and on Zoom. And that includes if you've participated in an event with us previously.
Okay.
What are you worried about with how your company and how the protests and everything are going right now? Obviously, there's a lot in the news right now with protests, with the ICE
Yeah.
shooting and everything. Have
Yes.
you seen an influx of people reaching out to you to help you organize those kinds of things recently?
Well, to tell you the truth, what happened there is a clear illustration of why our method works and the kind of alternative law breaking method does not, right? Because ultimately, that method is extremely dangerous. The idea of like, we're going to block a road, we're going to block law enforcement, we're going to, trespass, we're going to vandalize, right? Ultimately, that creates the predicate for what happened, right? Now, just to be very clear, I'm not taking a position on what happened. That's for law enforcement to decide on whether the shooting was justified or not. But what I can comment on is from the protest standpoint, blocking a street as she was doing is illegal, right?
Yeah.
And her job was not her what she was trying to do is not just block a street, but to impede law enforcement, right? So that's illegal, right? We don't want to do that. And ultimately it's not effective because you look, this protest failed. ICE has doubled its presence, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a totally legitimate argument to protest at ICE facilities, protest at detention, demand that ICE abide by people's basic rights, right? Like people have the right to due process, people have the right to a search warrant, all of these things. So I think if you want to critique ICE for, wearing masks, for using unmarked cars, for being aggressive in their tactics, like those are very legitimate criticisms, and those are criticisms that I think conservatives and liberals should have, right? But my point is that blocking the street is ultimately, and these kind of illegal forms of protest put people at risk, but also ultimately are counterproductive.
Is that something you go over with them? Like when you're interviewing, you tell them, hey,
Oh yeah.
don't do this, don't do this.
Not
Here's
only do
what
we
you're
tell
allowed to
them that,
do.
not only do we tell them that, if they're not 100% committed, they will not participate in one of our events.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay. You got anything else?
Yeah, I was curious for the ordinary person like us, when we see these protests going on, are there ways to tell if somebody staged it or hired these people other
Someone's
than
always
just
staged it. Someone, unless it's just a couple random people with shitty looking signs, pardon my language. Like as someone staged it, every movement in American history that you've heard of, gay rights, civil rights, MAGA, Tea Party, it's a staged movement. There's billionaires and millionaires and large interests behind it. So like let's not be naive here. Let's understand that. My advice to your audience, I'm gonna leave your audience with two pieces of advice. A piece of advice number one, understand that movements you disagree with and movements that you agree with, they're all, if you've heard of them, they're backed by rich, powerful interests. Focus on the substance. Don't try to
okay?
just try to tar people by saying, oh, this movement's paid for and my movement isn't, because your movement is paid for as much as the other guys. So this whole concept of astroturf or whatever, this is just like this concept that people have created to like just because they don't like what people are saying.
Mhm.
So forget that. Number two, the other important thing to consider is, and if this is my advice to anyone engaged in their own advocacy efforts, whether you're fighting an airline customer service, your insurance company, whatever, in your personal life, try to figure out, number one, who actually has the power to help you resolve your situation, right? So if you're mad that your flight is delayed, right? Don't yell at the flight attendant. He or she does not have the power
Yeah.
to make the flight on time, right? That is just rude. Focus on the person who caused the situation, right? And
Right.
try to get them and figure out what is your suggested resolution. Maybe you want to be rebooked on another airline and figure out who has the power to do that. And the second part of that is to figure out what you can do to incentivize them to do what you're looking to do, right? So that's the hallmarks of advocacy, is figuring out who is in charge and how you can kind of persuade them legally, of course, to do what you need to do. So that's my advice for your audience. Hopefully that is helpful in your own lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good. Anything else?
I'm good.
All right. Well, Adam, we thanks for your time, man. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
It's
Yeah,
been a
it's been a
pleasure. We
blast.
hope to catch up with you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All
Thanks.
right. Have a good one. All right. We hope everyone enjoyed that interview with Adam. He's a busy guy, so we didn't have a ton of time, but I think that was a good conversation. It was nice to hear him talking about the current situation in Minnesota and how his company does not want people blocking the streets and interfering when they're out protesting.
I was quite impressed with Adam. He's a very smart guy, and hopefully we can talk to him again in the future sometime.
All right, let's start with our updates segment. Everything we talked about from the last episode, we need to update you on. Here's the latest on the Minnesota ICE shooting. New details about the ICE agent involved in the Minneapolis shooting have emerged from federal officials. The agent, identified in media reports as Jonathan Ross, suffered internal bleeding to his torso after being struck by the SUV, according to multiple U.S. officials familiar with his medical condition. He was taken to a hospital and treated before being released the same day. Despite the reports of internal bleeding, some people still don't think that car hit him. Federal officials have now said the Department of Justice will not open a civil rights investigation into the shooting. The DOJ says there's no legal basis to do so, and that the ICE agent acted in self-defense during a chaotic enforcement operation. That decision alone has set off a new wave of controversy. Several federal prosecutors in Minnesota have resigned in protest, saying they disagree with the DOJ's handling of the case. Supporters of the DOJ argue this shows internal politics creeping into law enforcement decisions, while critics say it proves accountability is being avoided. Meanwhile, the victim's family has hired the same lawyer that George Floyd's family hired. On the ground in Minneapolis, protests and clashes continue. ICE operations have drawn large crowds, activists are actively trying to interfere with enforcement actions, and dozens of arrests have been made. New videos circulating online show agents being surrounded and blocked, which federal officials say explains why the situation escalated so quickly. Federal authorities are framing this as a law enforcement officer responding to a direct threat, while activists and local leaders are calling it an abuse of power and demanding broader investigations. This case has officially moved from a shooting investigation into a national fight over immigration enforcement, federal authority, and whether officers are allowed to defend themselves.
It did not take long for this to move on from the woman who died. As I said before, they wanted an incident like this, and I'll just say this. I think you are stupid if you would interfere in a law enforcement operation for someone you don't know. Given what we've seen, I don't think we're seeing criminal charges, but in the lawsuit-happy United States of America, the officer and the agency will certainly see a civil suit. And I did see some of the prosecutors who resigned did so because the DOJ wanted to look into Renee Good's widow and her potential ties to activist groups. The protests in Minnesota will not change anything, as I've said before. If you want to protest, go to Capitol Hill and protest against the people who write the laws, not the ones doing their job and enforcing those laws.
On to our next update, the Iran protests. Since we last recorded on Sunday, protests in Iran are obviously still going on. The government basically shut down the internet, and the regime cracked down hard. Arrests, force in the streets, and now they're even talking about fast-track trials and executions. Now you're seeing these massive death toll numbers being pushed out by activist groups. Maybe they're accurate, maybe they're not, but with the internet cut off, nobody can really verify anything right now. There are reports of over 12,000 people killed, but we can't verify the numbers. Meanwhile, the Iranian government is blaming the United States and foreign influence. Our priority should be protecting American interests, keeping pressure where it makes sense, and not letting emotions or headlines drag us into something we'll be paying for 10 years from now. Iran's regime is brutal, and Trump is making threats. Trump has already slapped a 25% tariff on any country doing business with the Islamic Republic of Iran. All that said, what happens next, Matt?
The internet has been shut down. Power is being turned off for long stretches. The current death toll that has been confirmed is in the 2000s. The true number is going to fall somewhere between the confirmed and that 12,000 number. Iran has recently closed its airspace. Only flights to and from Iran can fly through Iranian airspace. Iran has also issued an assassination threat against President Trump, saying they won't miss this time. As far as what comes next, I mentioned in the last podcast episode that the regime will not go quietly, so expect the protests and the crackdowns to continue. The regime sees itself as doing what God wants, so they will not go down easily. The death toll will be a lot higher if the protesters stick with this and continue until the regime falls. We are going to continue hearing the regime say things like the protesters are enemies of God. That is their justification for all of the deaths and the severe crackdown on the protesters.
What I don't understand is how Russia is condemning us for saying that we would help and telling us we shouldn't interfere in Iran and Venezuela, yet they're in the middle of invading Ukraine. That seems a bit hypocritical, doesn't it?
It's very hypocritical, but Vladimir Putin doesn't see the world the way we do. Vladimir Putin does not see Ukraine as a sovereign nation. Putin sees Russia as it was before the Soviet Union fell. In his mind, Ukraine is Russia, so he is simply trying to reunite the motherland that is the former Soviet Union. Now, Russia kind of had to jump in and say something. When you add in the fact that Venezuela's leader is gone, this is Russia trying to prevent another ally from falling. The Russians don't have the capability to intervene, so offering your support verbally is all they could do. About 95% of the Russian military is in Ukraine, and the rest is doing the border protection that every nation does, so there's no capability left to intervene on behalf of the regime.
We've seen these protests before in Iran. Does this feel more serious than it has in the past?
It does feel different. The protests are taking place all over the country with millions of protesters. Past protests weren't this large, and the crackdown was brutal and it ended those protests much quicker. I think most of the protesters know at this point that if this fails to end the regime, the next protest could have faster and more brutal crackdowns.
So why are we not seeing a response from the liberal media and the influencers about this? They rushed out to support Palestine, but there's nothing about Iran and the suffering over there.
Because they're only against Trump. We saw that with Maduro. You can see they are not sure which side to be on. They say they are against dictators, but the dictator is against Trump. So are they really against the dictator? It goes back to that saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The liberals just don't know what side to take right here.
That's what it seems like. As we've mentioned in the past, whatever Donald Trump says, they just have to take the opposite side of it. Aside from that, Iran's currency, the rial, is basically worthless at this point. $1 is equal to 1.4 million plus rials. Some analysts and reports describe the rial as practically worthless because its purchasing power for imports and savings is almost gone. So what's the true fallout if Iran's money isn't worth anything? What happens?
So speaking generally, when a currency collapses, it really hurts the people in the country. The price of imported goods skyrockets. The money people have saved quickly loses purchasing power. Businesses have to constantly raise prices to keep up with the devaluation of the currency. That can put the country into a cycle where hyperinflation sets in, where prices for goods double or even triple every few days to weeks. Salaries can't rise fast enough to keep up with inflation, so purchasing power for everyone drops rapidly. You often see this cycle lead to shortages and hoarding of needed goods. People buy as much as they can while they can before the currency devalues even more. You often see black markets emerge where people trade goods in foreign currencies. Because of all of that, you see the tax revenue for the government collapse, and the fix for the government is often to print more money, which only makes inflation worse. It is a tough spot to be in because it's very hard to stop the cycle. A good example of that is Venezuela. This makes life for everyone harder, and that's why you're seeing these protests.
All right. Well, obviously the story in Iran is ever developing, and I'm sure we'll have more on that in the next episode. Let's talk about the court case that a lot of people have been pretending isn't happening, and that's the fight over men and women's sports. This week, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a pair of cases that basically ask one question. Can states say that women's sports are just for women? That's it. That's the core of the entire debate. The cases come out of states like West Virginia and Idaho, where lawmakers passed laws saying biological males should not compete in girls' and women's school sports. Not to shame anyone, not to attack anyone, just to protect fairness in competition. Now, opponents of these laws argue that banning transgender athletes violates civil rights laws like Title IX and the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. And that's what the court is being asked to decide. But here's what stood out during the oral arguments. Several justices, especially on the conservative side, weren't buying the idea that this is some harmless symbolic issue. They kept coming back to the same reality. Sports are a zero-sum game. If someone with male biology takes a spot, that's one less opportunity for a girl. One justice even said basically, you can't pretend biological differences don't matter in sports, and that's something most normal people understand instinctively, even if activists don't want to admit it out loud. On the other side, liberal justices pressed the argument that these laws are discriminatory and exclusionary, but they struggled to answer a pretty basic question. If sex doesn't matter in sports, then why do women's sports exist at all? And that's really the heart of it. This isn't about hate. It's not about denying anyone dignity. It's about acknowledging that biological reality and protecting opportunities for girls. Scholarships, championships, records, and safety. What's interesting is that based on the questioning, the court looks likely to uphold the state laws. And that would be a huge deal because more than half the country already has similar policies in place, and this could lock them in nationwide. Of course, that doesn't mean that this debate is going to end. It definitely doesn't. But it would mean that legally speaking, states are allowed to draw a line and say where women's sports are for women. This feels like one of those moments where common sense is finally being defended. For years, people have been told to ignore what their eyes tell them, to stay quiet, or risk being labeled something ugly. A final ruling is expected later this year, probably early summer, and when it comes down, it's going to shape sports, schools, and culture debates for a long time. This isn't radical, it's not extreme, it's protecting women's sports, and it shouldn't have taken a Supreme Court case to say that.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are enormous differences in biology between men and women. It is about fairness. Men are bigger, taller, and faster. Men have higher muscle and bone density, which gives men an advantage in nearly every sport. But hey, if there's no difference between men and women, let's get rid of the WNBA and just have them try to make the NBA teams. You know the men in the NBA won't care about that. Liberals won't want to admit it, but there is not a single woman in the WNBA who could make an NBA team. Not one. Do you remember, Mike, when Clay Travis offered the WNBA champions $1 million to play a high school state champion? The women on the team wouldn't do it.
I remember that. He even offered $1 million of his own money.
Yeah, and they wouldn't do it. Serena Williams played a man who was ranked in the 200s for the men's ranking. And the surprise wasn't that she lost, it was that she scored a point in her loss that lasted about 15 minutes. Men's sports and women's sports are not the same, and Serena Williams herself has said as much. We need the Supreme Court to rule that men are men and women are women. We are not the same, and you can't change it.
And to say that we're not the same does not mean that one is better than the other. As Joe Rogan said in one of his stand-up comedies, he's not sexist. His favorite people in the world are women. He said, I have a wife and daughters, and I love them more than anything. But I could beat the crap out of every one of them. It's just a biological fact that we are different. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that one of us is worth less than the other.
Correct.
So I got a few quick examples of the differences between men and women in sports. And these are just a couple. I didn't even go over like team sports. These are basically just single competitor sports. So in 2014, Fallon Fox, a biological male, competed in women's MMA and fractured the skull of Ashley Evans Smith. Ashley later said that she had never felt that level of strength from another female opponent.
The worst part of that example is Fallon Fox never told anyone he was a biological male. So he got in the ring with a woman and she thought she was fighting another woman. If Ashley had been told that it was a man who also had the training to fight, she's not taking that fight. For good reason.
Yeah, exactly. The next one, and probably the one that most people have heard about the last couple of years, thanks to Riley Gaines, is Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas competed in women's NCAA swimming after previously ranking far lower in the men's competition. Thomas won a Division I national championship and consistently displaced female swimmers from podium spots and finals. Then we have the story of two biological males who competed in the Connecticut girls track events. They won multiple state titles, setting records and displacing female athletes. Several girls later sued, saying they lost championships and recruiting exposure. There's also stories of multiple women's cycling events that saw biological males dominate podiums. Female cyclists publicly protested, and some refused to race. The main trend you see here is that it's always biological men switching over to compete against women. It is never the other way around. It is always a man who cannot compete with other men and decides to switch over, and all of a sudden, they're dominating. That is not a coincidence.
It's not. And the craziest part to me of all of the transgender people in women's sports part was when the IOC decided to allow transgender people to compete in the women's categories. They set an arbitrary number for how much testosterone the trans athlete was allowed to have in their system. But the funny part of it was that if a biological woman tested at the same level of testosterone, she would get a 4-year ban for doping.
You ever see the stand-up comedy from Jeff Dye? He used to be more of a comedian, but now he's kind of stepped out into, politics a little bit. Like he's on Gutfeld every once in a while and shows like that. But in one of his stand-up comedies, he said, men and women are not equal. And then he goes on to say, being equal means we're the same, and we're just not the same. And then he says, and that's not a bad thing. He's like, think about it like this. How many of you tonight, when you came out here, hired a dude to babysit your kids? And he's like, yeah, none of you, because you're not an idiot.
Yeah, I've heard of him. I don't remember that exact one, but he has some good ones.
Yeah, there are things that women are better at, and there are things that men are better at. The funniest thing about that stand-up is when he's explaining it, and he says, you want to know what my favorite thing about a woman is? It's that she's not a dude.
Yeah, that's a good part of women. You need both men and women for society to function, so we're both great in our own ways.
That's right. All right, it is time for our blind ranking segment. We are doing political commentators. Once again, Matt's going to rank them from 1 to 5 without knowing what comes next. Once he locks it in, he cannot change it. Matt, you ready?
Let's go.
All right, your political commentators. Your first one is Brett Baer.
Brett Baer, very neutral. One of the last to just report the news and not really give his opinion very much. I'm going to put him at 3 because I don't know who else is coming.
Okay, number 3 for Brett Baer. Next up, you got Sean Hannity.
I like him, but I'm thinking I probably should have put Brett Baer a little higher now. I'm going to put Hannity at 4.
Okay, Hannity at 4. Next up is Steven Crowder.
I'll have to go risky here and put Crowder at 2.
Okay.
Leaving 1 and 5 open.
Crowder at 2. Next up, you have Tim Pool.
Oh, that's tough. I like Tim Pool, but I don't listen to him very often. So because of that, he has to go number 5.
And in your number 1 spot, you have everyone on The View.
Well, that sucks.
I thought this list was a slam dunk for you. I thought there was no way you could.
When you said political commentators, Brett Baer threw me off because I don't really see him that way. He's more of a journalist.
Yeah.
So I ballparked him in the middle and then quickly realized that I'm going to have an issue here later if the others are not political commentators.
I thought after you put Crowder at 2, when you heard Tim Pool, you'd go, well, he's got to go at 1.
Yeah, but I didn't know who was coming next.
Well, you got tricked.
And I don't listen to Tim Pool very often, so.
He's a really good one. I listen to him a lot. You should. At least I've started listening to him a lot more recently than I have before. But yeah, he's a really good one. I would definitely listen to him because he is, I think, a little bit more on the right, but he is more in the middle. He has a very good perspective on a lot of things.
As far as people on that list that I would trust the most, Brett Baer would be number 1.
Yeah.
But as far as people I watch and listen to, he's not number 1. That's why I put him in the middle.
Right.
But man, The View at 1, that hurts.
Everyone on The View.
That hurts.
All right, well, that's it for episode 27 of the Republic Brothers podcast. We hope you enjoyed the interview with Adam Swart. If you're still listening, you're exactly who this podcast is for. Before you click away, please do us a favor, hit the subscribe and follow button. New episodes drop every Monday and Thursday. If you agree or disagree with anything we talked about today, drop a comment and let us know. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.